because the knot will slip and break. The length of drop, that is the distance between the rod tip and the sinker, will vary according to the design of the rod and to the way you cast. Almost always it's going to be around half the rod length or perhaps a little bit longer, and the final step for learning to cast is just to attach a sinker. As I've said, in England we use about 150 grams of lead, and even if you plan to fish with something lighter than that, say 100 grams, I would strongly recommend that when you're learning the techniques you use 150 grams. I don't want to get into the technicalities of why 150 grams is probably the right choice, other than to say that it's the easy option. It's quicker and easier to learn to cast well using about that much lead. The lighter the lead, the more trouble you can have. I know that doesn't sound very logical, but it's the way things go. I forgot to mention setting magnet brakes. Well, that's very easy. To begin with, just set them to maximum. If your reel has a combination of magnets and blocks, usually the best way is to put in a couple of medium-sized blocks and then put in full magnet power. That's a good combination to get you going. Next question. Which cast would I recommend to a beginner? And do I have any special observations about that cast? I've been teaching casting for a long time, and I've always found that the easiest way to learn to cast or to correct problems in an existing style is to cast with the lead on the ground. The advantage of off-ground casting, and I'm going to mention the easy cast technique in particular here, is that it's the quick way for you to learn how to make the rod work properly. All casts, including the pendulum, the South African cast, and the many variations of off-ground and aerialized casting techniques, all use the same basic underlying principle. That is, they make the rod work properly. And the easy way to do that is to eliminate as many variables as possible, and also to set up the tackle in such a way that you are guaranteed to get some compression, that is bending, into the rod early in the power flow. You need to get that rod bent before you can put in any kind of power. Now what the easy cast does is put the sinker in a starting position that guarantees high inertia. Another way of putting it is the lead weight wants to stay where it is, so that as soon as you start moving the rod, the sinker resists and therefore the rod has to bend. Once the rod has started to bend, then you can put in your power using either body rotation or arm power, or best of all, a combination of both. So the easy cast is the one for beginners. You may be in circumstances where you cannot cast off the ground. I appreciate that on many kinds of coastline you cannot do that. You can't lay out your sinker and your bait. Even so, to learn to cast off the ground. Because all good casting uses the same underlying principle, it's then very easy to switch to the pendulum cast if that's the way you want to go. Now the only difference between a pendulum cast and an off-ground style such as the easy cast is that in a pendulum cast the sinker begins in mid-air, whereas in an off-ground cast it starts on the ground. It's just a matter of positioning things. So I can swing the lead up into a position in mid-air and then get on with the cast, or I can lay it on the ground if the ground happens to be clean. Either way, I'm going to use the same power flow. That's one of the secrets of casting that people don't appreciate, that there is really no difference between any of the good ways of casting. The next question on the list concerns the kind of learning curve that you can expect when you're a beginner. Well, to begin with, you're going to struggle a little bit as you become familiar with your tackle and with a technique such as the easy cast. I'm going to assume that we're using an easy cast because that gives me a framework to explain some points to you. If you've never cast before, then learning something like the easy cast is quite simple because you don't have any bad habits and you also don't have any muscle memory. Now, muscle memory is something that athletes talk about. Muscle memory is a kind of automatic process by which you carry out motor skills. It happens in everyday life, not just in casting or in sports. What it really means is that as you become more familiar with the technique, and especially when you begin to feel the rod working properly, your muscles will get a kind of memory for it so that the whole process becomes automatic. When you started driving an automobile, you probably had all the problems of using the clutch and the gear lever and the steering wheel. And after a little while, you didn't think about those anymore. It just happened automatically. Well, casting is pretty much the same thing. It takes time to get there. If there's one thing I would recommend that will help you, it's to slow down. As you become more familiar with what you're doing, you try and put in more power, you try and go faster, with the idea that if you do that, you'll cast further. Well, that's not necessarily so. As a general guide, if you halve the speed that you're casting at, you'll probably get on a lot better. You may need to vary the layout angles of the easy cast, and you may need also to adjust the drop, that is the distance between the rod tip and the sinker. The other thing you'll notice is that when the cast is going smoothly and you're starting to pick up distance, the braking system on the reel will be too high. At that point, just back things off a bit. With the magnet, it's very simple, just use a lower setting. Just go progressively lower until you find the point where you get nice line flow, but you don't have a problem with backlashes. Brake blocks are just as easy. You begin with 2 large blocks. When that's running okay, change to 2 medium blocks. And when you're used to that and you still need to reduce the braking a bit more, go to 2 small blocks. Once you become quite experienced and your distances are around the 125 metre or even a 150 metre mark, then you might well find that 1 small block is what you need. Don't worry about using 1 block, it's not a problem. You won't get imbalance in the spool, it'll be nice and smooth. And that's about it from the control point of view. I think it's a good idea to sometimes put on 170 grams or maybe more, or go down to 100 grams. Learn to feel the difference in the rod as you put in different amounts of power and different amounts of sinker weight. It will all help you in the future. If ultimately you want to get to pendulum casting, then at some stage you need to learn the pendulum swing. Learn that separately, and then you let everything run on automatic control. You don't try to control the power stroke. It's the same one that you've been using during the easy cast, and you just let things happen. And while we're on the subject of letting things be automatic, don't try to control the release point when you let go of the cast, when you take your thumb off the reel. It will happen automatically. The less you try to interfere with that, the better things will be. Because one thing's for sure, once you're getting some power into the cast, you won't be able to hold it back anyway. All that will happen is you'll tear a lump out of your thumb. Just go with the flow.